She ruled the empire of crime, and believed nothing could ever bring her down, until love appeared wearing the face of her enemy. That night, between smoke and rain, power met desire, and desire demanded its price. Valentina Castellani, the woman who reigned over fear, would soon discover that the only thing an empire can't control is its own heart. The night smelled of gunpowder and regret. Valentina ran through the wet streets, her heels echoing through the alleys like a heartbeat about to burst. The rain fell hard, mixing with the smoke of burning cars, and every drop felt like a memory coming back to collect what was never forgotten. The sky, covered in black clouds, mirrored the same chaos rising inside her. The empire she had spent years building was collapsing before her eyes. And amid the ruins of her reign of fear and respect, fate had the cruelty to place her face to face with the one man who dared to love her and betray her. The cold wind cut through the air, and for a moment she wanted to believe it was just another night of war, another score to settle, another storm that would pass. But his gaze, standing still beneath the flickering streetlight, said otherwise. Adrian was there, the man who promised her safety and brought destruction instead. The man who taught her that love can be a weapon disguised as shelter. The city screamed around them, but time seemed to stand still. She tasted the metallic mix of anger and fear, and the sound of sirens in the distance felt like a cruel reminder that the past always finds its way back. The streets that once bowed to her power now swallowed her in silence. Valentina walked through the wreckage, every step a wound reopening, every breath a thread of resistance. The woman once called a queen was now a fugitive, not just from the law, but from herself. The memory of a forbidden kiss haunted her like a scar that never healed. A kiss that began as defiance and ended as a sentence. She tried to erase his face from her mind, but the heart doesn't take orders from someone who lived on control. With every lightning strike cutting across the sky, she saw the reflection of everything she had lost: power, respect, her empire. But nothing hurt more than losing the one thing she never planned to feel. He took a step toward her, and the world seemed to shrink. The distance between them was made of everything left unsaid, and the silence screamed louder than any gun ever could. Her hands trembled, but not from fear. It was the rage of recognizing love where there should only be hate. Adrian tried to speak, but his words drowned in the rain. Valentina looked away, and her heart broke with a sound only she could hear. His face was different now, less enemy, more human, and that made it even worse. Love and guilt burned together like fire and gasoline, and she knew one wrong move could bring everything crashing down. He reached out his hand, hesitant, as if he could fix what he had destroyed. But she didn't believe in redemption from someone who could lie while looking her in the eyes. The pain, cold and heavy, ran through her like the rain washing over the streets. Thunder tore through the sky, and the past came flooding back. The first meeting, the glances that lasted too long, the power play that turned into desire. He disarmed her without firing a single shot. One touch was enough. One promise was enough. And now, amid chaos and fire, she realized it had all started the same way, with a kiss that cost her an empire. Love was the only territory she never learned to conquer. And there, between sirens and ashes, she finally understood what she had never wanted to admit. No empire is ever invincible when the enemy is your own heart. Before everything fell apart, there was only power. Valentina was the kind of woman who never asked for permission. She commanded, decided, conquered. Her presence alone could silence entire rooms. Eyes dropped when she walked by. Voices trembled, not out of respect but fear. She had inherited her father's empire, but what she built from it went far beyond anything he had imagined. Under her command, the cartel became an invisible web connecting governments, corporations, and secrets. There wasn't a single street, business, or life she couldn't buy. The world called her a criminal, but she saw herself as a survivor. Every scar was a story of triumph. Every cold decision, a way to never be weak again. The men who tried to control her learned the hard way that you can't cage a storm. Valentina didn't need to raise her voice. A single look was enough. Her gaze was a sentence. Her words a decree. Power took shape on her lips. And yet, beneath all that steel and calm, there was something she never let anyone see. When the lights went out, when the champagne stopped sparkling, there was a woman tired of waking up among ghosts. Someone who, even surrounded by luxury, still slept with weapons aimed at her loneliness. She had learned early that love and trust were traps in disguise. She grew up watching her father slowly die, betrayed by the same men he once trusted. She swore she'd never depend on anyone. She built her own language of survival, where every touch was suspicious, every smile a test. And yet, amid the money and the threats, there was still a void that power could never fill. Her heart was an empire in ruins, quietly waiting for redemption, but she pretended not to notice. The fear of feeling was stronger than the fear of dying. The newspapers called her the Queen of the Underworld, a title she wore like armor. But no one knew how cold the throne really was. Every victory tasted like loss. Every night of celebration hid the memory of someone who never came back. There was blood on her hands, yes, but there were broken promises too. The price of ruling is losing your soul, and she could no longer remember when she stopped feeling anything at all. Valentina looked out the window of her office, the city glowing like a necklace made of lies. Down below, the world slept under her control. But what is power when there's no one left to share the silence with? In the reflection on the glass, she saw a woman who looked untouchable, yet carried the eyes of someone who had loved and lost. She touched her wineglass and tasted time itself. The distant sound of rain reminded her that even if her empire was made of iron, her heart was still human. And it was in that fragility that fate began to crack her walls. Deep down, she knew no throne lasts forever, that an empire can fall, but a single glance can start it all again. And when the right pair of eyes met hers for the first time, the world she had built on fear began to shift. A tiny, invisible crack appeared, small, silent, but fatal. He came without warning, carrying a storm in his eyes and a secret in his pocket. His name was Adrian, a businessman, at least on paper, with promises of clean deals and quick profits. Valentina watched him from afar, first with suspicion, then with curiosity. He was different from every man who had ever crossed her path. He had a calm that disarmed, a presence that didn't ask permission. He didn't flinch before her, didn't pretend respect, and maybe that's what caught her attention the most. He spoke little, but every word felt carefully chosen, the kind of precision that belongs to those who know that silence, too, is power. Their first meeting was a game without rules. She tested him, he answered with irony. He provoked. She pretended not to care. The lights reflected in her eyes like blades, but he didn't look away. "You don't seem afraid of anything," she said, her tone sharp. He replied with a faint smile, the kind that hides old wounds. "Maybe I just got used to danger." And in that moment, Valentina felt a kind of risk she hadn't felt in years. Not the risk of losing money, but of losing control. Adrian carried a strange elegance, a mix of discipline and mystery. He didn't wear the scent of power, or the arrogant gaze of men who think they rule. He moved with precision, as if he already knew the ground beneath his feet. Valentina tried to read him the way she read contracts and lies, but the more she looked, the more he slipped through her grasp. He was like trying to hold the wind, impossible, yet irresistible. Deep down, she knew that something like this always came with consequences. Their meetings became frequent, sometimes for business, sometimes by chance. She told herself it was only curiosity, but her heart quietly disagreed. She started to notice his hands, firm but careful, and the way he looked at her, not as a boss nor a threat, but as someone who genuinely intrigued him. He saw her, and that was dangerous. No one had truly seen her in years. With time, their conversations grew longer. Serious topics turned into subtle exchanges, small provocations wrapped in irony. The heavy atmosphere of her world felt lighter whenever he was around. And no matter how hard she tried to deny it, Valentina felt a strange peace in his presence, a kind of silence that didn't weigh her down. For someone who had survived chaos, love was a flaw in the system, but she was beginning to fail, and she knew it. One night, she found him alone in her office, staring out at the city below. The moonlight traced the outline of his face, and something inside her wanted to ask who he really was. But she didn't. The air between them was thick, full of truths that neither dared to speak. He turned to her and said something simple, yet unforgettable. "You know what fascinates me about you? It's how the world seems to fear you, and still, you look tired of winning." The words disarmed her. No enemy had ever hit her as deeply as that look. Valentina tried to laugh, to change the subject, to put the mask of power back on. But the laughter died before it began. He was too close, and the silence between them was almost tangible. For a moment, she forgot who she was, and that was the beginning of her downfall. The danger no longer came from the streets or her rivals. It came from her heart. And the heart, she knew, is the most unpredictable enemy of all. From that day on, nothing was simple. Adrian's gaze became a territory Valentina feared to cross, yet she couldn't stay away. He approached with the calm of a man who knew the risks, and she pretended not to notice, even as her heartbeat betrayed her. The game began quietly, built from measured words and glances that lasted a second too long. A compliment disguised as a tease, a silence heavy with meaning. The tension between them grew like a controlled flame, beautiful, dangerous, impossible to extinguish. And perhaps that was exactly what drew her in. Valentina had always owned the board. No man had ever made her hesitate, but Adrian wasn't a common opponent. He didn't want the throne. He wanted what was behind it. He played slowly, understood the value of patience, and that unsettled her. Every meeting was a battle fought in silence. She threw challenges. He answered with irony. And when their eyes met, a war unfolded without a single word. Desire tangled with fear, and fear with curiosity. To love someone like that was like dancing on the edge of a cliff. Dangerous, intense, impossible to resist. The nights started to stretch longer. Work became an excuse for meetings no one dared to question. The scent of cold coffee and expensive cigarettes became part of their ritual. He would wait in her office, calm as ever, while she decided how much she could allow. Sometimes they talked business. Sometimes they talked about nothing. And in that nothing, in the pauses before a sentence, in the held breaths, in the subtle provocations and confessions disguised as sarcasm, in the almost touch of hands, that's where the game lived. She watched him closely, trying to understand what he hid behind that calmness. No man steps into the underworld without a reason, but his seemed different. There was no ambition, no fear, no greed, only a strange need to be near her. He looked at her like someone trying to decipher an ancient book, knowing each page could hold a sentence. And for the first time she felt truly seen. It was a dangerous feeling for someone who had spent her life hiding. An accidental brush of their hands over a wineglass, a quick gesture to move a strand of hair from her face. A gaze that didn't waver. Everything was part of a silent duel. She provoked, he struck back. The room became a battlefield made of breaths. Valentina felt control slipping through her fingers. And no matter how hard she tried to regain it, it was already too late. Her body was saying what her mind refused to admit. Love, even in disguise, is the most intelligent enemy there is. One rainy night, he found her on the balcony, staring at the city. The wind was fierce, and her dress moved like an exposed secret. He approached slowly, respecting the silence, and stopped beside her. "You never sleep?" he asked. She smiled without humor, Queens don't sleep. They keep watch. He looked toward the horizon and said softly, "Maybe that's why they end up alone." She couldn't tell if it was a provocation or a warning. But what she felt at that moment was something even fear couldn't erase. The dangerous game had no rules and no escape. Every move brought them closer to something neither of them could control. And the more she tried to resist, the more fate seemed to laugh at her struggle. Deep down, Valentina knew no empire is immune to love. And his gaze, calm, unwavering, was living proof of that. A look that promised as much danger as salvation. What began as curiosity had turned into a storm. Adrian woke up with her face in his mind and fell asleep with the weight of his lie on his shoulders. Each encounter felt like walking a tightrope between duty and desire. He had sworn loyalty to the law, but his heart had already crossed the line. Valentina's eyes haunted him. Her scent lingered on his skin. Her voice echoed in his mind like a confession. And the more he tried to resist, the more impossible she became to ignore. The forbidden love, the kind that begins with guilt and ends in pain, was consuming him from the inside. He knew he had to destroy her. But how do you destroy the one who taught you how to live? Valentina, on the other hand, began to feel the weight of her armor. Power had always been her refuge, control her language. But Adrian disrupted everything. He didn't demand, didn't plead. He simply existed. And that was enough to tear down the walls she had spent a lifetime building. On the days he didn't show up, her office felt too empty. On the days he did, the air felt too heavy. No decision seemed safe. No choice felt right. And amid the chaos, she began to realize that while the empire might one day fall, her heart had already surrendered. She didn't understand what she saw in him. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the way he never tried to save her or fear her. Maybe it was just his eyes, that look that made her feel there was still a woman alive beneath the queen. Part of her wanted to push him away. Another part wanted to keep him close. It was an invisible battle, fought somewhere between her thoughts and her skin. When she saw him smile, the world seemed to stop. When he walked away, everything lost its color. And that contrast between the duty that kept her alive and the desire that set her on fire was becoming unbearable. One afternoon she asked him to meet her privately. The excuse was to sign some contracts. But what she really wanted was to understand him. He arrived as always, dark suit, calm disguise, watchful eyes. She studied him in silence for a few seconds. There was something in his posture, an invisible weight, a guilt he didn't quite manage to hide. And for the first time, she realized he might also be fighting something greater than her. "You look tired," she said, pouring him a glass of wine. He gave a faint smile. "Maybe I'm just tired of pretending." She raised an eyebrow. "Pretending what?" He hesitated, but his answer came in the form of silence. And in that silence she understood everything. The tension between them turned electric. The air grew thick. Time slowed. Every word was a spark waiting to ignite. Every gesture a failed attempt to escape, but there was no escape left. Adrian knew he had to end it, that he was playing with fire, and fire eventually consumes everything. But when her eyes met his, the rest of the world ceased to exist. Truth didn't matter. Lies were just a way to keep that fragile moment alive for one more heartbeat. He loved her, and it was destroying him. She loved him, and it was making her weak. Neither admitted it, but both knew. And so, between papers, contracts, and restrained glances, something was born that was never meant to exist. A dangerous love. A forbidden romance, the invisible line between right and wrong. A feeling that asked for no permission, made no promises. It simply existed, raw, intense, uncontrollable. And amid the coming storm, both could already sense it. Something big was about to happen. Something that would change everything. The night seemed to breathe with them. Outside, the city burned in silence, and inside the abandoned hall, fate waited patiently to act. Valentina moved through shadows and metallic echoes, surrounded by armed men, every step a calculated risk. Adrian was there too, standing amid smoke and flickering lights, his gaze locked on her, as if the whole world depended on one gesture, one choice. The negotiation was just a cover. The real battle was in their eyes, in the words left unspoken, in the truths burning quietly inside. Chaos erupted fast. An ambush, distant gunfire, shouts, confusion. The air grew thick, the sound of bullets blending with the rain that had begun to fall. Valentina drew her gun, cold and precise, and for a moment she looked like the queen she once was. But then she saw Adrian on the ground, trapped behind a stack of crates. Instinct took over, louder than reason, stronger than fear. She ran to him, ignoring the gunfire, ignoring the pain searing through her leg. She pulled him up, dragged him behind a pillar. His eyes met hers, and in that gaze everything forbidden screamed all at once. For a second, the world stopped. The sound of the rain muffled the war. The wind carried an impossible silence. She was breathing hard, face wet, his hand gripping her arm. Neither knew what to say, and maybe they didn't have to. Their bodies spoke what their minds tried to hide. Fear and desire melted into one, and the distance between them disappeared. A kiss was born in the middle of destruction, urgent, wrong, inevitable. A kiss that carried anger, longing, and surrender all at once. Valentina felt the ground vanish beneath her. There was no empire, no guilt, no past, only his touch, the taste of something she had never allowed herself to feel. Adrian held her like a man holding his own forgiveness. In that instant, there were no prosecutor and criminal, no hunter and prey, only two weary souls trying to breathe the same air. And what was duty turned to ash. What was fear turned to fire. The rain washed over their faces. The scent of gunpowder mixed with skin. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was a release, a confession without words. The kind of act that changes everything because it reveals what neither had dared to admit. Valentina pulled away, shaken, her eyes trembling between anger and desire. "Why did you do that?" she asked, barely able to speak. He took a breath and answered with his eyes. Because there was no choice left. Because love, when it arrives, doesn't ask permission. It invades, destroys, and starts again. I stood there motionless, between the approaching sirens and the heartbeat still racing too fast. Valentina's empire was beginning to collapse, but something new was being born inside her. Something pure yet wrong, dangerous yet necessary. Love, which had always been her weakness, now felt like her only truth. And when he pulled her close again, she didn't resist. Because for the first time, she didn't want to be a queen, or a strategist, or an enemy. She just wanted to be a woman, someone who, for a brief moment, allowed herself to feel. That night, the underworld found a new queen, not one made of iron and fear, but of heart and chaos. And when she opened her eyes and saw their reflection in the puddle beneath them, she knew nothing would ever be the same. Because the kiss that should have been the end was, in truth, the beginning of the fall. Dawn arrived without mercy. The sun seemed to mock what was left of the night before, shining through shattered windows and glinting off puddles that still carried the bitter taste of everything left unsaid. Valentina woke before the city, still dressed in chaos, her heart beating out of rhythm. The kiss lingered in her mind, echoing endlessly. She tried to convince herself it had been a mistake, a lapse, an unforgivable distraction. But when she ran her hands over her face, she could still feel his touch. Warm, alive, impossible to forget. Love, once a distant threat, had become a sentence. And she, who once commanded everyone, no longer commanded herself. Adrian hadn't slept either. Sitting in his hotel room, he stared at the phone as if staring down his own judgment. The mission that had brought him to her was still in motion, but his heart had already betrayed the report. Inside his briefcase were recordings, documents, evidence, everything that could destroy her. And yet, he hesitated. The weight of the truth crushed him. Being an undercover prosecutor had never made him feel so much like a criminal. Because now, every lie he told, every word he withheld, carried her face. And her face was the only place where he had ever found peace. But peace doesn't last in worlds built on shadows. Betrayal, silent and patient, was waiting for its turn to reveal itself. An informant, a forgotten file, an intercepted recording. His voice, clear, cold, professional, saying what should never have been heard. Valentina listened to everything alone, in the dark of her office. She didn't cry. She just listened, motionless, until the final second. The tape fell to the floor, but the silence was heavier than the sound. For the first time in a long while, she felt true emptiness. Not the emptiness of loss, but of surrender, the feeling of having laid herself bare before someone who came only to pull the trigger. The world turned slowly. A glass on the desk reflected the city outside, and in it she saw herself, small, fragile, human. The woman who had turned fear into an empire was now a prisoner of her own heart. Love, the thing that once seemed redeeming, had revealed itself as another form of destruction. And still, no matter how much she hated his name, part of her forgave him. Because no one lies with that much pain in their eyes unless they're torn between two worlds. Adrian was that, half light, half ruin, and she loved him for both. She paced across her office, each step a rehearsal for revenge, each breath a battle against the tears threatening to fall. The ticking clock seemed to mock her. The tape still spun in silence as if fate were replaying itself just to make sure she understood. Valentina grabbed the recorder and threw it against the wall, but anger healed nothing. Pain is a kind of prison that can't be broken by force, only by memory. And remembering was what hurt most. Outside, the city carried on as if nothing had happened, but inside her, everything had changed. Love had turned to poison. Trust had become a corpse. The woman who once commanded armies now couldn't control her own heart. The world could burn and she would feel nothing. And yet, a single whisper of his name would be enough to reopen hell itself. And there, among the ruins of what was left of the truth, she swore never to love again. Because love, she had learned, was the most unforgivable crime of all. The night returned thick and heavy, echoing with ghosts. Rain pounded against the warehouse windows like a war drum, its rhythm blending with Adrian's unsteady breath as he knelt before her. Valentina paced in slow, deliberate circles, her heels striking the wet floor, eyes locked on the man who had destroyed her empire and broken her heart in the same breath. The gun in her hand weighed little compared to the storm inside her. He didn't try to escape. His gaze was hollow, exhausted, filled with truths that no longer mattered. The distance between them felt like an abyss, one they had both helped to dig. Silence became its own living thing, thick and almost breathing. She stopped in front of him, the barrel of her gun aligned with the heart that had once made her doubt herself. "Were you just like the others?" she asked, her voice low but sharp enough to cut. He drew in a slow breath, closed his eyes, and answered with what little courage he had left. "No. I was the only one who ever truly loved you." For a heartbeat, the air vanished. The hatred that had kept her standing blurred into something she refused to name. Love was still there, disguised as rage, pulsing beneath her skin. She stepped closer, pressing the gun against his chest. Her hand trembled, not from fear, but from memory. Moments flashed through her mind like lightning, the first glance, the first touch, the first kiss. All of it tangled with the sound of that recording, the lies, the promises. "Loving you was my most expensive mistake," she whispered. He opened his eyes, calm and unafraid. "And yet, it was the truest thing we ever had." The words cut through the air like a blade. Tears threatened, but she held them back. Queens don't cry in front of traitors, but women do, when the truth bleeds. Time seemed to stop. She could kill him and end everything, but nothing in her wanted an ending. She wanted to understand. She wanted to believe that some part of it had been real. Love and vengeance clashed inside her like gunpowder and fire, waiting to explode. He didn't defend himself, didn't beg. He just looked at her with the quiet acceptance of someone who had already surrendered. And maybe that was what broke her, realizing that he wouldn't fight back, that he was giving himself to her even in his final moment, as if death was just another way to stay close. Her finger brushed the trigger but didn't pull. The rain grew louder, drowning out the sound of their uneven breaths. Then came the echo, the gun hitting the floor, ringing like a verdict. Adrian stood slowly, unhurried, and took a step toward her. They stood face to face, close enough to feel each other's warmth, far enough to know they'd never belong again. He touched her face gently, a brief, fragile touch, almost a farewell. "You taught me what love is," he said softly. "But love never forgives." She looked away, but her body stayed still. The hatred faded, leaving behind only exhaustion and a kind of pain that has no name. The entire world seemed suspended in that single moment, the one where both knew nothing would ever be the same again. The love that bound them would be the very thing to destroy them. The wind blew, the rain stopped, and for a heartbeat, silence ruled once more. Valentina picked the gun up and holstered it. Not to use it, but because she needed to feel the weight of something that reminded her of what she'd lost. When she walked out of the warehouse, she didn't look back. Yet with every step, his name echoed in her mind like a vow. Because she finally understood, too late, that love and revenge share the same taste. The bitter flavor of everything that never comes back. Dawn came draped in grey. The sky looked tired, as if the city itself were mourning what was about to unfold. Valentina's streets, once filled with movement and fear, were now ruins of broken promises. The empire that had once been a symbol of power was dissolving, swallowed by the same ambition that had built it. News spread like fire on dry paper, arrests, betrayals, escapes. And among the names whispered in the reports, hers was the one spoken the most. Valentina Castellani, the woman who ruled the underworld and defied fate, had become nothing more than a shadow, a legend burned by her own light. The strike came without warning. Police surrounded the ports, planes were seized, vaults emptied. Allies vanished like smoke, and the loyal sold silence in exchange for freedom. Every phone call was a disguised goodbye, every familiar face a potential threat. And she, wounded, bleeding inside and out, ran through the back alleys of the very city she once swore to control. Sirens tore through the air. But what truly haunted her was another sound. Adrian's voice in her memory, saying he loved her, that things could have been different. The empire collapsed like a sandcastle, and Valentina, standing in the middle of the flames, seemed made of iron and guilt. The wind carried the scent of smoke and regret. She walked among the ruins, watching buildings burn, flags fall, symbols fade. Every shattered wall told a story of alliances, oaths, and false smiles. Everything she had built through fear now burned before her eyes. And ironically, the only name that echoed in her mind wasn't that of an enemy, but of a man who had betrayed her out of love. There was chaos everywhere, but inside her was a silence more violent than fire. The pain didn't come from losing power, it came from the cost of having it. She had traded everything human for an empty throne, and when love finally found her, it was already too late. Her heart beat slowly, like a broken clock, marking the time of a life that no longer existed. The underworld mourned her fall, but the heavens remained indifferent. And maybe that was fair, after all. Those who challenge fate must learn to fall quietly. Amid the fire, Valentina found the shattered mirror from her old office. Her reflection appeared in 1,000 fragments: queen, lover, traitor, survivor. Each piece showed a different version of her, all true, all condemned. She touched the glass and felt the cut, blood tracing the final signature of an empire now reduced to memory. "I fought the world," she whispered to herself, "but I lost to what I felt." The words faded into the smoke, carried away by the wind. She fled before the trap could close. No car, no plan, only instinct. She ran through the empty streets, her body begging for rest, her soul begging for forgiveness. Behind her, the distant wail of sirens grew faint, as if the past itself were finally letting go. And when she reached the docks, she saw the reflection of the flames in the water, the mirror of the hell she had created. The city burned, and love burned with it. The empire was dead, but she, against all odds, was still breathing. As the fire devoured what remained, Valentina understood something power had never taught her. Everything built on fear dies in guilt. Love, destructive as it was, had been her final truth, and there, among ashes and wind, she swore never to forget. Because even fallen, she was still a queen, not of gold and empires, but of ruins and memories. Time moved without hurry, as if the world had forgotten her name. Years later, far from the city, the sea was her only witness. Valentina lived in silence, hidden behind a new name and a face reshaped by the wind. The power that once surrounded her had become memory, the luxury had turned to dust, and the past just a shadow that no longer hurt as much. Every night she walked to the same spot on the beach, where the sound of the waves whispered what her heart still refused to forget. The moonlight touched her like an old friend, and beneath that pale glow she looked once again like the woman who once commanded the world. But now, without guns, without empire, without masks, only human. The sea mirrored the moon like a broken reflection, and in it she saw the same image she used to see in Adrian. Beautiful, distant, impossible to touch. Sometimes she thought she heard him calling her name between the rhythm of the tides. Other times she believed it was nothing more than a weary memory trying to stay alive. Longing was an old wound that had learnt to ache in silence. To love someone lost in time was to live between the before and the after. Yet there was something beautiful in that, the quiet certainty that even among ruins, love still breathed. Valentina learned to cherish small things, the smell of coffee at dawn, the cry of the gulls, the feel of cool sand beneath her hands. Simple things that never fit inside the iron throne she once built. For the first time, she didn't need to command anything, only to exist. The woman who was once feared had become just a story whispered by fishermen and carried by local legends. They said she spoke to the sea, and that sometimes the sea answered. Maybe it was true. Maybe it was only the wind repeating words that fate had forgotten to erase. One of those nights, as the sky filled with clouds and the moon seemed closer than ever, she closed her eyes and smiled. The past had stopped being a prison and had become a memory. Love had stopped being guilt and had turned into a gentle longing. And for the first time Valentina felt peace, the same peace she had searched for all her life, but only found when she stopped fighting. Deep down, she finally understood that redemption doesn't come when we are forgiven, but when we learn to forgive ourselves. The wind blew hard, and for a moment she caught his scent, that faint cologne, the imagined touch, the invisible presence. She smiled, the way someone smiles at a familiar ghost. The sea before her kept breathing, and the moonlight painted across the horizon the end of one story, and the beginning of another. Valentina sat in the sand and watched the moon's reflection tremble on the water, the last moon, the same one that had witnessed her empire rise and fall, her love bloom and die. And as the sea exhaled, she whispered softly, almost like a prayer, "I lost everything, except the memory of the man who taught me that love is the most dangerous weapon in the world." Some loves are born to set the world on fire. Others exist to teach it how to rise from the ashes. Valentina lost everything: her power, her empire, her name. But she found something no throne could ever give her: peace. Sometimes, love doesn't come to save us. It comes to show us who we truly are. And now tell me, do you believe that love can redeem even the most lost of hearts? If this story moved you, subscribe and turn on notifications to discover more tales of passion, power, and redemption.